We are in a battle for the soul of America.
This is a fraud on the American public.
Welcome to After America. I'm Dr. Emma Shortis, Director of International and Security Affairs at the Australia Institute. This is the last of our daily episodes. As my trip to the United States comes to an end, I wanted to take the opportunity to reflect a little bit on the experience of being in the United States at such a critical inflection point in its history. And I think the thing that might stay with me the most as I attended a few events for Kamala Harris is the impact that all of this will have on young American women. I've spoken before about being in Charlotte in North Carolina at a Kamala Harris rally and the extraordinary experience of being at a political rally so dominated by women and young women in particular. That experience was replicated in Philadelphia in that long line that I waited in to try and get into that last Kamala Harris rally. And then again twice at Howard University, the first time on election night at what many hoped would have been a celebration of Kamala Harris's victory and was nothing of the sort. And then the following day at her concession speech.
By treating one another with kindness and respect. By looking in the face of a stranger and seeing a neighbor. By always using our strength to lift people up, to fight for the dignity that all people deserve. The fight for our freedom will take hard work, but like I always say, we like hard work. Hard work is good work. Yes. Hard work can be joyful work. Yes. And the fight for our country is always worth it. It is always worth it.
And I think the thing that will stick with me the most out of this trip is looking around in that crowd and seeing so many young Black women who were not crying, who were clearly holding a lot of emotion, but who didn't seem all that surprised by the election outcome. And I keep coming back to an essay that I cannot recommend highly enough by Dr. Tressie McMillan Cotton, who's a sociologist based in North Carolina and also a New York Times opinion columnist who has written about Black women in particular knowing their whites and knowing really not to trust the American electorate. And along those lines, something else that will stay with me, I think, for a really long time is leaving Harris's concession speech as the sun was setting in DC and walking along the street with a lot of other people and a young woman approaching me and saying that she was walking alone and would I mind if she walked with me. Of course, I didn't mind and we got talking. She was an elementary school teacher from New Jersey, only a recent college graduate, and she was telling me that in some ways Harris's loss to her was a relief. It was a relief to her to know that being perfect doesn't help. She thought that Kamala Harris had run a perfect campaign and she'd spoken perfectly in her concession speech, demonstrating extraordinary grace under pressure. Throughout her campaign, she hadn't been too emotional. She hadn't been too aggressive. She'd been beautiful. She'd smiled just enough, not too little, not too much. She was as close to perfect as a woman candidate and a Black woman candidate could ever have been, and it still wasn't enough. And the way that this young woman spoke about that being a relief to know that she didn't have to be perfect, that it didn't matter, was quietly devastating.
I know we have still not shattered that highest and hardest glass ceiling, but someday someone will, and hopefully sooner than we might think right now. And to all the little girls who are watching this, never doubt that you are valuable and powerful and deserving of every chance and opportunity in the world to pursue and achieve your own dreams.
And it is really extraordinary to think that the United States, the most important experiment in democracy in the history of the world, as Joe Biden likes to say, still hasn't had a woman president. Of course, multiple things can be true at once, and we have to be able to hold multiple things in our heads at once. The glass ceiling still exists. It is very real. Kamala Harris ran a good campaign. It's also true that Donald Trump traded off structural and deep racism and sexism and was able to combine the two into a toxic mix in a more effective way than almost anybody else.
I say to them tonight, there is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America. There is not a black America and a white America and Latino America and Asian America. There's the United States of America.
And it's far from an original observation to say that the United States is not one country. My experience here in Washington, D.C., in North Carolina, in Pennsylvania, bears that out. And while it may be true that Kamala Harris ran as good a campaign as she might have been expected to given the circumstances, the Democrats have failed for decades. They have failed to account for Bill Clinton's role in the complete restructuring of the American economy and what is widely regarded as the decimation of the Rust Belt. They have failed to account for the Obama administration's economic policies in the immediate aftermath of the global financial crisis, which overwhelmingly privileged rich corporations at the expense of working people. It's also true all at once that the Obama administration both bears some of the responsibility for the rise of Donald Trump and that the Obama administration and Barack Obama in particular unwittingly, unintentionally, and through no fault of his own, unleashed a predictable and historically consistent white backlash that culminated in Donald Trump. That's all a long way of saying that there is a lot of blame to go around for what is happening in the United States today. And some of it is ours as well.
Our nations are bound by a history of shared sacrifice, a commitment to common values, and, above all, enduring respect and affection between our peoples. I look forward to talking with President Trump and working with him in the interests of both of our nations. President Trump has run a campaign based on change, and he's made it clear he's going to do things differently. So we shouldn't be surprised as things change, but equally, we should be really confident in ourselves and our place in the world as well, and our ability to deliver on our interests together as Australians.
Australian media bears just as much responsibility for its normalisation of Donald Trump and for the way the Australian government dealt with his first administration. And there has, again, been a repeat of that failure of imagination in the Australian media. You know, this consistent refusal to connect what happens in the domestic politics of the United States with our alliance with the United States. There is always this imaginary dividing line between domestic politics and foreign policy. That leads to an assumption that the alliance is above domestic politics, and that all we need to do is manage Donald Trump and the relationship can continue as it always has. That leads to a media mindset that focuses on questions like, should we replace Australia's ambassador to the United States, Kevin Rudd, with someone like Scott Morrison? Please. This is about so much more than just managing Donald Trump as some kind of aberration, and hoping he'll let us have the submarines or hoping we'll be able to carve out exceptions to the worst of his economic policies. That was the mindset the first time around. It was wrong then, and it's wrong now. This is not business as usual for Australia's relationship with the United States.
It's the enemy from within, all the scum that we have to deal with that hate our country. That's a bigger enemy than China and Russia. I think the bigger problem is the enemy from within, not even the people that have come in and destroying our country. By the way, totally destroying our country. The towns, the villages, they're being inundated. But I don't think they're the problem in terms of election day. I think the bigger problem are the people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. It should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military.
I don't think we've really grappled with the big questions about what a Trump administration will mean for Australia. How is the Australian government to respond, for example, if somebody like the CIA director in the first Trump administration, Mike Pompeo, comes back to power? This is a man who was head of the CIA while, according to media reports, that agency was discussing options to kidnap and even assassinate an Australian citizen in Julian Assange. What is the Australian government going to do if Donald Trump, for example, sets the National Guard or the military on his own people? These are now very real and very pressing questions for the Australian government. And I think it's critical to remember that the second Trump administration will be quite different and much more dangerous than the first. We can't avoid that, and we shouldn't normalise it. There is a great deal of fear here in the United States, and I suspect at home too, about what a second Trump administration might mean, not just for the United States, but for the rest of the world as well. Both Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have tried to reassure not just their supporters, but the American people more broadly, and along with them, the rest of the world, that things will be okay.
There's an adage an historian once called a law of history, true of every society across the ages. The adage is, only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. I know many people feel like we are entering a dark time, but for the benefit of us all, I hope that is not the case. But here's the thing, America, if it is, let us fill the sky with the light of a brilliant, brilliant billion of stars. The light of optimism, of faith, of truth, and service.
As leaders, Harris and Biden have a responsibility in this way to mobilise their supporters to try and ensure that they don't fall into cynicism and that they don't give up. But it's also true that things are probably going to get very dark very quickly for a lot of Americans, and possibly in our region too, as Donald Trump undoes any and all global climate action that the Biden administration was engaged in. That will have considerable effects, catastrophic effects potentially, on our neighbours in the Pacific. That will impact as well geopolitics as rivalry between the United States and China ratchets up. But at the risk of sounding a little bit too much like Kamala Harris, we don't have to give up the fight either. We don't have to just cop whatever Donald Trump throws at us and manage him as best we can based on the assumption that we still need the United States for our security. Cozying up to Donald Trump does not make us safer. We are not powerless in this. We do have some agency. And we can exercise that agency by connecting with those who have an interest in democracy and in democratic institutions here in the United States. We can work on our democratic partnerships and on strengthening our own democratic institutions. We can too play an important role in the world using our considerable diplomatic strength to shore up and to uphold the institutions and practices of international law. We can focus on the things that really do make us safer. We can focus on collective and human security. And we can continue to ask ourselves, what might we do in the world if we weren't so afraid? This episode was recorded on Thursday, the 7th of November, US time. No doubt a bunch of stuff will have happened since then. If you're enjoying After America, please help us spread the word by telling your friends about the show. You can find us on social media. We are at the Oz Institute, that's with an AUS, on Twitter and Instagram. And you can reach out to us with feedback and episode ideas via our email address, which is podcasts@australiainstitute.org.au. Our music is from Blue Dot Sessions. I am getting on a plane on Sunday US time, so we're going to take a little break while I make my way home. We'll be back to regular programming next week with an episode dropping on Tuesday with a very special guest. Until then, I'm Emma Shortis. Thanks for listening.